My name is Eduardo Rodriguez. I'm going to talk about the importance of quality software assurance in our software development projects. I have dedicated the past 15 years of my career in this subject, and it's going to be a great pleasure for me to talk about how we can implement all of these activities, testing activities, in an effective way in our projects. When software testing activity is integrated to the software development life cycle, it can reduce the cost of the project up to 40%. When software testing is executed before the system is published and released to the end users, many defects will be found and corrected by the developers before being found by the end users. Also, it increases the quality of the software project, because the end user expects all the requirements to be implemented in the software. Also, it provides information for decision making. Through software testing activity, I can measure the quality of the software before it is published. And also, at least but not less important, it increases confidence and relationship between the software company and the customers and the end users, because they will feel confident in using the software. However, it is important to note that there are 150 existing test software activities to be implemented. And many times, software companies are just too casual about implementing software testing activities in their projects. Many questions like, from these 150 testing activities, which one should we implement? Also, who should implement these testing activities? When to implement them? And the last one, how we must implement software quality assurance in our software development project. During this presentation, I will answer all of these questions. It is important to note also that many software companies apply software testing activities just after the code is finished. They start by applying functional testing, non-functional testing, usability testing, and many other testing activities. But software testing activities starts in the very beginning, in the first stages of the software development life cycle. It starts with the requirements. When the software team is discussing about the requirements of the system, the requirements must hold all the information that will be necessary to understand the system, to develop the system, and also to test the system. If the requirements are not clear to the software developers and also to the testing team, there is a problem. So when we validate these requirements, we can already find many problems in the software. When the requirements is understood by the software development team and also by the testing team, we can move to the next stage of the software development life cycle. We move to the architecture. We must validate the structure of the system, starting with the layers, with the classes, with the integrations between the software itself in the database, and also with the integration with other systems. And when it's validated, we can move to the next stage of the software development lifecycle, the codification. When developers are coding their softwares, they must execute unit code validation. We must understand if the whole team is using the same patterns, if they are using the same structure, if they are following the same business rules for each part of the system. And then we start executing the traditional testing activities in the test phase of the software, validating if all the requirements were implemented, validating if the business rules were applied, validating if the components of the systems as well as the fields that will be part of the screens are working, if the buttons are working, if the parameters are being properly set, and then we can move to the next stage, the acceptance the acceptance phase. In the acceptance phase, it's an important part of the testing activity because we have to test and validate the system in the production environment. Usually when we are developing a specific system, it works in the development environment, but it doesn't in production environment. So that's why the same test case that were executed previously in the previous stage must be executed once again in order to make sure if everything is working in the production environment. And then if any problem or something must be changed in the software, or if new components or if new business rules will be applied in the system, we have to execute all the tests again in order to make sure if the systems that were working are still working and the new implementation are working as well. So if there is a problem in the requirements, and if the requirements are not clear to the developers and also to the testing team, so they will start coding the system with that problem. If the problem, however, is found in the requirement stage, it will cost only one time to fix that problem. If the problem moves to the next stage of the software development life cycle, it will cost 10 times. Here is where they start working with the architecture of the systems, with the layers, with the integration between the system itself and the database. If the problem moves to the codification stage, it will cost 100 times because the business rules or the requirements were not understood by the developers in the very beginning. They architectured the system in the wrong way, and now they are coding something that must be fixed in the future. So it will cost in this stage 100 times. Then when we move to the testing part, when the QA team, and each time I say QA, it stands for quality assurance, it will cost 100 times because the QA team will report the problem, it will go back to the developers, they will fix it, they will make sure if that part of the system that was fixed, it is in the compliance with the requirements, and then it will go back to the testing team once again to be validated. And then we move to the acceptance stage. Here is where we release the software to the end users. If the problems are not found by the QA team, end users will find them, and then they will have a bad user experience. And when they have a bad user experience, the problems will cost 10,000 times. And then we start having other problems. New problems will bring to the software company. Maybe they will lose, the business reputation will decrease. Also, maybe they will lose some contracts. They will have loss of money, and many other problems will bring to the company. But you have been wondering how it works in the Agile methodology development life cycle. When we are talking about Agile, we have the same software stages that we were talking about previously in one specific sprint. Usually a sprint will take about 3 weeks. When we start a sprint, the product owner will talk about all the new functions and new components and modules that will be implemented in that new sprint. When they are talking about these new user story or requirements that will be implemented in the system, here is where we have to start talking about the requirements. We must understand the business rules that are going to be implemented, the components that will be implemented, how they are going to be implemented, how it's going to be work. And also we have to set the acceptance criteria to validate these requirements in the future. Then also we move to the architecture part. When this is understood, we move to codification. We start testing these new modules of the system. If problems are found, we move to the maintenance stage. But when we are talking about software testing, agile development, there are other software testing activities that can be implemented during the sprint. We start when we are discussing the sprint backlog. we have to discuss and to define the test strategy. We have to discuss the requirements, the user story. We have to set the quality strategies to validate all of these new user stories. Then we move to confirmation testing activity, which means we are going to make sure that all problems found in the previous sprint were corrected. And if part of the systems that were validated in the previous sprint are still working with the regression testing. And then we started designing new test cases in order to validate the new components of the system. This is when we are talking about software testing, agile development. There is an idea about how the requirements must be clear to the software development team and also to the QA team. It's called invest. This is the most important part when we are developing a software. As I said previously, if the requirements are not understood, if the requirements are not clear, they will code something wrong. They will do something that usually will not be accepted by the end users. Invest. How clear a requirement must be. It must be independent. It cannot depend from other requirements. If it does depend from other requirements, it says that if a problem is found in one specific requirement, if it's fixed by the developers, probably a side effect will occur in another requirement. Negotiable. As a QA team, the QA team must prioritize these requirements. Which one is most important for the end users? Sometimes developers take too much time developing something that will not be used by the end users. So as a QA team, we must understand which part of the system will be used, more used by the end users. And then we move to the next step, the valuable. As I said previously, we are developing something. If that specific part of the system will not be important for the end user, why am I spending a lot of time validating this requirement? Estimable. Do we understand it well enough to estimate how long we are going to take to validate and also to code this requirement? Small. Is it smaller enough? And will it provide faster feedbacks? And the last one, is it testable? Is it clear to everyone? What are the acceptance criteria? If we can answer these questions, and if it's understood by the developers and also by the testing team, we are going to succeed in our project. And I brought here one real example from one of our clients. It's a bank institution. It's headquartered in Europe, and they asked our help because the end users were complaining about the app in the Google Play Store, and they didn't understand why. They told me they were executing many test cases before publishing the system, and all of these test cases passed. But when they published the app, the end users were finding a lot of problems, and they didn't understand why. And this is one real example I brought from them. They are, as I said previously, this bank institution is headquartered in Europe, and they are well established here in the United States. And this is one example. When we were taking a look at the documentation, they were using Agile methodology, and we found a user story. And the user story was about wire transfer. And this is all it says about the wire transfer user story. As a bank client, I want to wire transfer money to other bank accounts, and I want to immediately confirm the results of my operation. And the question is it really clear? Is it really clear to developers? Do you think that he's going to code in which way? Do you think that the developers have all the necessary information to code that user story? So let's move to the next part. When we opened that user story, we found a lot of business rules. Let's take a look at some of them. The first one says, if the end user chooses a wire transfer, it will cost $20. Moreover, bank will only authorize it if there is sufficient money for the transfer and the fee. That's a great information for me as a QA, because from that information I can design many test cases to validate it. The next business rule says there is no minimum or maximum value for wire transfer. End user may transfer any amount of money as long as there is a bank balance in his bank account. Alright, I can model many other test cases to validate that business rule. The next one, for each wire transfer, a confirmation pop-up must be displayed, and the user password must be inserted in order to confirm the operation. In the third business rule, I would ask the question, what kind of information must be displayed in this confirmation pop-up? So, if we don't know about this information, the developers will not know as well. So now we have to start discussion a little bit more deeper about this business rule. The next one, after the wire transfer is confirmed, the application must show a pop-up giving the opportunity for the end user to download the receipt. Alright, all of these business rules will become acceptance criteria when we are validating the software. And they were doing it, but yet the end users were still fighting problems. And the question is that enough? All of this information will be enough for the developers and for the testing team? Let's see the next slide. Here is an example we found. Actually, it was the first test case we executed in order to make sure why they were having problems with the app. When we are talking about requirements, we don't discuss only business rules. We have to discuss the components that will be part of that business rules, the component that will be part of the screen in order to build and to code that specific user story. In this situation, this is the screen of the wire transfer specification. When we are talking about requirements, we cannot validate only the business rules, as I presented previously in the previous slide. We have to understand all the components that will be part of the screen. In this real situation, it is the functionality to transfer the money. When we were executing and modeling some test cases, we found a problem. And actually, the end users were complaining about it. As we can see here, there is a component to insert the amount of value to be transferred. As we already know, we are all experienced about that. We all have already transferred some money by using any kind of app. It doesn't matter if you're talking about web application or mobile application. I know that this component must accept only numbers. But what's going to happen if I insert a letter in this component? Or if I insert a dot? Or if I insert a special character, for example? In this real situation, from this bank institution, when we insert a dot in that component, look what's going to happen. We have the component. The component is expecting numbers to be inserted, but instead of inserting numbers, I'm going to insert a dot. So when we inserted a dot, look what happened. I'm gonna start playing the video. So as we can see here, instead of inserting the number, we are inserting a dot. As soon as we insert a dot, the app freezes. But why does it happen? It happened because the developers and the QA team were not discussing about these components. They were only validating business rules. They were not talking about these fields that would be part of the screen. as a QA analyst, we must discuss the component type that will be part of the screen, the maximum and minimum value that will be accepted by that specific component. Also, we must discuss the component valid data. It must accept only numbers, only symbols, maybe letters or alphanumeric, only strings. We must discuss also the component behavior. Can I resize it? And if I resize it, what's going to happen? We must discuss also the default value of this component. As we can see here in the video, the default value is 0. And the last one, the component identification. This information is very important for me because if I have this information, I can start modeling the automated script without the system. So by applying software testing techniques, we start fighting these problems. So as we can see here once again, if these features would be discussed in the very beginning, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Agile or waterfall methodologies, if these components are discussed in the very beginning, in the requirements phase, it will cost only one time. But now, this bank institution is facing a lot of problems with their end users. They are not having a good experience with the app. So let's see what they are talking about the app. I just took a copy of the screen from Google Play Store, and 3.6 is the rate the end users are giving to this app for this bank institution. And let's see what they are talking about it. So Carol says that the app does not show accurate funds. Whoa, so this is important because the component was not, we can see that the components were not discussed by the software and testing team. Let's see what the user architect is talking about the app. He actually can't log in because it does not allow special characters to be typed in for the password. Carrie says that this app was great, but now all of the sudden the check deposit capture is not working. So maybe it was working, they were trying to fix a problem in the software, they were making some changes, and now it's not working. Jenny is considering a new bank. So we are talking now about bad user experience and also about business reputation. In the last keynote conference, in the last year, 227 billion of apps were downloaded. However, only 16% of the end users are willing to give a poor quality app more than one attempt. So this is what we see with Jenny. She's considering a new bank because the app is not working. And also, there were in the last year 24,000 distinct Android devices in the market. So it tells me the importance of automation because I can model 1,000 test cases, for example, and I can execute them in many different devices. And the question is, why software defects happen? In the software company, it may have not enough time to test the software. They publish the system without testing it. It may have not enough time to interact with the software testing team. It usually occurs when there is no documentation and there is the necessity to discuss these requirements with the testing team, but the software developers have not enough time to talk about it. It may be afraid to delay the software product release. So usually software company thinks that by applying software testing activities, they need to delay the release of the software. It doesn't want their software to be more expensive, or it uses its development team or amateur testers to perform the tests. So this is what we found in this bank institution, and it's focused on code validation only. But how professionals address these problems? First, QA team is unbiased. They don't care about finding defects. They will try to find as much as they can. Also, their activities are based on the best practices. They know the best testing techniques to be applied and also the best activities for that specific scenario. QA team has updated knowledge of the latest testing techniques. They have also a large experience in finding defects. QA team knows where the software is leaning to present problems. Also, QA uses accurate methods to better describe the identified defects. They provide videos, pictures, any kind of evidence to help the developers to reproduce and then fix the problems. There are some methodologies that must be used and also some testing techniques to find these problems. So that's why developers cannot execute test cases. That's why test activities must be implemented by QA professionals. I have selected here only 4 testing techniques that can help the companies to find problems in their software. It can be applied also in your software team. The first one is boundary value analysis. As we were discussing previously, if the functionality to transfer money is accepting number, as a QA analyst, I must understand how much money I can transfer in that component. What's going to happen if I transfer 0 money? What's going to happen if I transfer a negative number, for example, or if the maximum value to be transferred is 1 million, what's going to happen if I try to transfer 1 million at 1 cent? This technique is called boundary value analysis. The next one, invalid data, invalid values, as it was presented in the previous slide. What's going to happen if I keep the value of that component in blank? I try to transfer blank money, for example, or a specific symbol, or a letter, or if I mix numbers and letters and symbols, for example, what's going to happen? The next one, exploratory testing. What about if I copy and paste info into that component? What about if I miss some information when I am transferring money? And the last one in this presentation, Oracle behaviors. As a QA analyst, I am also an end user and I expect something from the system, like after the transaction is executed, I would like to see a confirmation pop-up saying that it was done. I can also use correct values to transfer. I can use the basic flow, the correct values to be transferred, whatever. So these techniques, when they are properly used by the QA professional teams, they will find many defects, and actually they will find those defects the end users are finding in this specific bank institution app. And now I have selected some examples to present. In this case, from a real example, when we are registering a new language, the system is expecting a code, but this code must be more than 1 and less than 999. However, I can insert as many numbers as I can in that specific field. What's going to happen if I hit the button save, for example? Let's see the next example. There is the email field, the email component. What is the limit of characters that I can insert in that specific field? If this information are not discussed among the members, software and testing team, this is what's going to happen. If there is no limit, I can insert as much as characters as I want. So we are going to have more problems. The next example, the component comment can be resized, but when I resize it, it overlaps with the button save. But worse than it, when I resize the component comment, I can replace the information inside the button save. When I select its information, I can change the value, the information in it. The next example, I'm talking only about software testing techniques. In this case, when we insert specific symbols in the password component, the system crashes, as it's presented in this slide. An error occurred. This is what the architect was talking in the bank institution app. He can't log in because he has a special character, but now he can't log in. The next one, when we were using symbols to register a new company, the system we're presenting was showing some weird information in parts of the system. Testing techniques, invalid values. Now when we use exploratory testing, there is the missing part information. When we miss some information from that form, when we hit the button update, look what's going to happen. An error occurred. But why? Because once again, the developers were validating only the basic flow, the happy path. They don't execute different scenarios. And the end users, they will do it. They will skip some information in the system. They will try to use the values they want, and we must validate all of them. In this example, when we were registering, making a new register in the system, instead of using the proper values, we were applying testing techniques. So there is the code field, and we were using blank information, and also we were using the number 0 that cannot be accepted by the system. When we were using these values, so look what happens with the system. The code field, we are going to keep it, we are going to use the number 0. When we save it, an error occurred. When we keep it in blank, so let's see what's going to happen. The same error happened. So that's the importance of having specialists applying and executing testing activities. When they do it, they know exactly the information they need to find these problems that will be found by end users if the testing activities are not properly implemented in the company. So when we are talking about business rules and requirements, these components must be discussed among software and testing team. And this is a real example. We just decided to not discuss but to document this information, and when this information are documented, it's great for quality software team. It will be great for the designers, for the front end, back end, the DBA. They can limit the components, the number of characters to be inserted in the components, in the fields. They can limit also the type of information that can be accepted, and these problems, these bugs, will not be found by end users. Also, when we are talking about automation, this is another problem we find in software companies. They automate their process, their testing activities, but they don't apply these techniques. And when they don't apply it, these problems will not be found. So when we are talking about automation, we have to automate the happy path and the unhappy path. And the unhappy path are done by applying these testing techniques, the boundary value analysis, invalid data, exploratory testing, Oracle behavior, whatever. They must be inserted in our scripts as well. One more example about the benefits of automation. This is one example about web automation. If we have 100 test cases to be executed in the system, we can pick up one of these. We can pick one of these tools to help us to implement our automation. But if I have to execute just 100 test cases in 5 different browsers and 2 different platforms, It's not 100 test cases anymore. Now it's going to be 1,000 test cases. Manually, it would take 11 days to be executed. But when we automate these test cases, the same 100 test cases to be executed, again in 5 different browsers and 2 different platforms, the same 1,000 test cases, in one night we can execute all of them because the tool will do it for me. I don't need any human resource. But when we are talking about mobile automation, we have more parameters that must be considered. Let's see this example. The same 100 test cases, but now in 6 different operating systems, 5 different brands, mobile brands, 3 different screen sizes, 2 different networks, Wi-Fi or LTE 4G, but now we don't have 100 test cases anymore. We have 18,000. Manually, it would take 62 days to be executed, but when we have automated scripts, it will take no more than 13 days. Based on these testing techniques, Brisa has developed a concept and a new methodology called software flash testing, which gives a quick view about the quality of the software in just one day. And I'm going to show you some examples. So I'm going to discuss also about each and every one of these modules. The functional testing module, which was executed with that bank institution, in just one day we are able to model 50 different testing cases by applying these testing techniques, and in just one day we have a big view about the quality of the software. On the user experience module, we are able to execute 150 test cases and also applying these test techniques, but with different balances about these techniques. The third one is called mobile compatibility module. We are going to module several test cases. We are going to execute them in 6 different mobile operating systems, starting with iOS 11 and the previous version, with Android, Nougat, Marshmallow, and the previous versions of the Android. So these first 3 modules are based on the test techniques that were previously discussed in this presentation. And in order to give an overview about the quality of the software in just one day, Brisa has developed 2 new modules called Performance and Load module and Security Testing module. And so let's talk about Performance and Load module. When we publish a web system, we expect a number of users to access that web application. However, we must understand if my servers and my application are able to support all of these users. They can access the system at the same time or during a period of time. We have developed and created this module to try to understand how many users and the system response related to this access. If we see here in the first chart, we have 500 users accessing the system in the period of 30 minutes. But at the same time, we can evaluate the system response. As we can see in the first chart, as the number of users increases, the system response time increases as well. So if I am expecting 500 users to access my system in this example, the maximum system response time would be 2.5 seconds. But is that acceptable or not? It will depend on the business rule, and I'm gonna talk about it in the next slide. In the next chart, in the bottom part, as we can see here, all of the 500 users received the same amount of data, except 2 users. So this is what happens when the server is not processing all of the access that is being received in the system. As we can see here, the CNN web page, 2 users did not receive all the information. because maybe the network is too overloaded or the server is too overloaded. But how fast does a web system need to be? The average is 3 seconds. This is the user expectation. But if the system takes 2 to 3 seconds to give the proper response, the system, the end users will keep focused. But 4 to 8 seconds, 30% of the end users will leave the portal. They will start doing something else. They will start looking around. They will start drinking a cup of water. They will open a new tab navigator. They will use social network, for example. But if the system takes 8 to 15 seconds to give the response, 60% will leave the portal, will leave the system. And above 15 seconds, 100% will leave the portal. Why? Because there may be problems with the bandwidth, SQL queries, code, server, hardware, network, etc. So before publishing the web system to the end users, we can execute these test cases, this performance testing. Now I'm going to talk about the last module, which is called security testing module. It's related to 2 specific testing techniques related to security. The first one is called open logical ports. When we published our systems, they are logical ports that if they are not closed, it's vulnerable for hackers. You can hack your system when these logical ports are opened. By executing test techniques, we can find out which logical ports are opened or not. If they are opened, the software company must decide if they will be closed, and it will be not vulnerable anymore to be hacked by someone. The next test activity we can execute by using some tools. We can figure out which software solution the software is using that's outdated. For example, if my web application is using Apache, if my Apache is not updated, it's vulnerable for attack. And only one day we can use these tools, we can identify these security problems in your system. Here is one example. I have hidden some parts of the information in this screen to not reveal the company's name. But as we can see in the bottom part of the screen, we discovered 10 different logical ports opened. And this is very dangerous. Through these logical ports, someone can hack the system. So by using this tool, we can make sure if these ports, logical ports, are closed or not. The importance also of having QA professionals is they provide the necessary information for the software development team. They will provide, and they must provide, the test plan, which it contains the schedule, it contains the scope, the resources, the environments, the strategy that will be implemented in that specific web application or mobile application. It doesn't matter. They will model test cases based on the best practices. They will provide all the necessary information to the developers and to anyone else who needs to see these information later. Also, they will provide the defect reports, all the problems they found and the necessary steps to reproduce these problems, also with evidence, which will help the developer to just take a look at the evidence, and the developer will be sure which part of the system must be changed in order to fix that problem. And the last one, the technical report, which it contains the project summary, statistics, defect densities, analysis, and any other necessary information to help the software team. Brisa has executed over 10 million test cases in 20 countries. Brisa employs more than 150 highly qualified test analysts and has over than 28 years of experience. Our services are always based on the best practices. Related to software testing, Brisa uses the International Software Testing Qualification Board. There is no bureaucracy. In just one day, we are going to give you the best results and the results you need related to the quality of your software. Brisa is local. Brisa is here in America. It's located here in Orlando, and it's also a member of the UCF Soft Landing Program. So if you have any question or if you're interested in our services, we have our